Chapter 7 Bristle and Emeraldo. The ragtag group of heroes made their triumphant return to the resistance outpost, making sure to pass through the gate carefully. Saying hello to the guardsmen posted out front, the group of five passed by the merchant's stalls, enjoying the smells of fresh-baked bread and fish soup wafting over them. They returned to the Grand Maester's hall, where Emeraldo and Bristle were there to greet them. Green and red fire bursting from their maws in excitement. "Good to see you two," Bronn remarks warmly, giving his dragon a friendly pat on the head before entering the Grand Maester's hall. Sharon, the Grand Maester himself, and Jace followed behind him. Phil returned to his hut a stone's throw away from the Grand Maester's hall, presumably for some well-earned rest. Twilight was settling on Outpost, and Grand Maester set a tea kettle on the furnace, asking Bristle to light the fire. "Bristle, light the fire, please." Bristle quickly obliged him, lighting the tinder below, sending smoke up through the chimney and into the darkening sky above him. Then, Jace sets down his son's sword and shield and turns to Bronn, Guildmaester, and Sharon, saying, "Now that we have King Danfon's attention, what's next?" Bronn replies, "Jace, Sharon, and I are both tamers now, meaning we will need some time now to raise our dragons before we can do anything about King Danfon's dragon, Greywinter." It had hardly been a day, and already the two hatchlings were beginning to grow, their heads widening and the tips of their wings lengthening. Sharon walked over to Emeraldo, and the dragonling hopped on his tamer's shoulder eagerly. She fed him a rabbit haunch, the young dragon gulping the entire thing down in one bite. Bronn did the same with Bristle, and the dragoness began to calm down, gazing curiously at Emeraldo. Warm thoughts and feelings crept into Sharon's head, and she looked down to see the source was Emeraldo. Dragons often like to communicate through feelings and emotions instead of words, especially at a young age. From Bristle, Bronn was receiving similar emotions of warmth and happiness. "Come to Uncle Grand Maester, little ones," the wise man said affectionately, and the two dragonlings flew to either one of the Grand Maester's shoulders. "Already calling yourself uncle, eh, Grand Maester?" Bronn asked, amused by the idea of his old teacher already taking on the role of doting uncle to the two dragons. Pole was about 20 yards away in the stable next to Grand Maester's hall when he raised his head and lifted his ears suddenly, having just heard a high-pitched screech in the distance. What a mess King Danfon made this time. A huge, hideous creature with dark gray skin, shrunken wings, and two black twisted horns, thought to himself, carefully examining the host of 30 men that the king had prepared for him to attack Outpost with. Always so careless, that one. He should have given the egg to me. Would have made for a delicious breakfast. Jaggernaut thought again to himself, raising his shrunken wings and lifting himself into the sky. Jaggernaut yelled, or in his case, screeched, to the gathered hosts of men that they were moving out. He flew in the sky around the men, watching their torches and swords gleam menacingly in the night. Not far now. When I get there, I will make sure to have myself some dragon caviar. The 30 men approached Outpost on foot, the massive wooden structure jutting out from the surrounding forest, like a shoulder protruding from a chest. Chapter 9. Heat of the Resistance. The prior chapter was Chapter 8, Jaggernaut and the Gargoyle. "We need to move now. If the king sent," the Grand Maester cuts Bronn off, "then we're all doomed." "Right. Bronn replies, taking hold of Bristle's sides, much to her dismay, flooding his head with unpleasant feelings. Sharon does the same with Emeraldo, saying to Bronn, "We need to leave the dragons here. They're not big enough to be of any use in this battle." Jace rushes to grab his son adorned sword and shield. "I'll meet you there at the main gate. I'm sure that's where they will attack," Jace hurriedly says, sprinting out of the Grandmaster's hall. "Grandmaster, you stay here too. Watch the dragons, and I do not want you getting hurt." "I also don't want you getting hurt," Bronn says. Grandmaster responds, "Fine, Bronn, but before you go, let me transfer knowledge of Lightning Bolt to you," Grandmaster says, reaching out, grabs Bronn's shoulder, closes his eyes, and transfers his knowledge of the lightning spell to him. "Thank you, Grandmaster. We're ready to defeat Jaggernaut now," Bronn says to him, and Sharon and the elf leave the hall together. "Go with my blessings, young one, and take Jaggernaut out. Forward the resistance." Bronn and Sharon cross the distance between Grandmaster's hall and the outpost gate, swiftly meeting up with Phil and Jace on the way. Before they reached the gate, Vlad the Pale and his men met them too, raising their number to a total of 12 warriors. The 11 men and 1 woman walked briskly to outpost gate and positioned themselves around the perimeter in a semicircle. "Here, Sharon, consider this a gift for becoming a new dragon tamer." From the tan bag at his side, Bronn pulls out Chrysalis, handing the blue sword over to Sharon, who graciously accepts it, putting the sword at her side. "Thank you, Bronn. This is most generous of you." "Thank you, Bronn. This is most generous of you," Sharon says. The 12 saw from atop outpost gate Jaggernaut and his 30 men gathered at the edge of the bay surrounding outpost. Jaggernaut himself was hovering low above the ground, his mouth frothing with yellow foam. Bronn takes command of the situation and says, "Sharon, you and I will teleport behind the enemy and attack. Jace, you lead Phil and the other soldiers in a narrow barrage." With a confident look on his face, Jace says, "Aye, Destroyer. 5 speed be with you." With no further words, Jace and Phil lead the newly appointed soldiers up on top of the wall, and Bronn and Sharon teleport behind Jaggernaut and his host. Chapter 10. The Battle for Outpost. Bronn and Sharon come out the other side of the teleportation spell unscathed. However, Jaggernaut notices them right away with a terrible screech, soars directly towards them, claws extended forward. Thankfully, arrows began raining down on the unprepared men, taking out 10 of them right away. Jaggernaut was nearing them now, and Sharon turns to Bronn and says, "Bronn, grab my hand now." Bronn turns a shade of pink and says, What no time to explain, just do it." Bronn obliges her, and as soon as his hand touches hers, a brilliant beam of red and green light intertwines and shoots out of their chests. The beam of light nails a hole directly in Jaggernaut's heart, and he falls to the ground unceremoniously, black blood oozing from the new hole in his chest. Meanwhile, more arrows are raining down on the host of men, and noticing the death of their leader, they quickly lose their resolve to fight anymore and run, screaming into the forest. The beam of Bronn and Sharon embrace for the second time today, both not caring anymore what the other would think. Meanwhile, shouts and whoops of joy can be heard coming from the direction of the gate. "Come on, Sharon, let's go back," Bronn says, taking her hand and teleporting the 2 of them back to directly inside Outpost Gate. When they return, Jace, Phil, Vlad, and his men were there to greet them, everyone giving each other exuberant pats on the back. "Sharon, how in the name of the 5 did you just do that?" Jace asks. Sharon responds with, "I'm not sure, but it just felt like the right moment for it to happen." That night, everyone celebrated at the Grandmaster's Hall till the sun came up. Stories were told, songs were sung, and everyone finally could breathe a sigh of relief. As the new age of dragons was beginning to unfold. Pole got the oats Braun promised to get for him earlier, and all night he sat in the stable, munching away at the bag. According to Groudmeister, this new era would be called the Byron Age, after the two new dragons, Braun and Sharon, that were now in existence. Bristle and Emeraldo flew in circles all night, and their red and green flames lit up the night sky. All was well in Outpost. For now.